In the cold October of 1987, on a lonely stretch of farmland in Nebraska, a story unfolded that still defies science, faith, and reason. A story whispered in bars, studied in sealed laboratories, and denied in courtrooms. It began with a man named Gerald Holbrook, a recluse who lived alone with his herd of cows after his wife's disappearance. But when 3 children suddenly appeared on his isolated farm, children who called him father, the truth proved far stranger than rumor. Their eyes were wrong. Their voices were wrong. Even their very blood pulsed to a rhythm not meant for human veins. What Gerald revealed that night to a sheriff and a doctor wasn't just disturbing. It was a revelation that blurred the line between man and beast, love and madness, life and something else entirely. And the horror? It wasn't contained to one farm. It was spreading. Before we dive deeper, do me a favor. If you enjoy exploring dark, forgotten histories like this one, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves eerie, true-style stories. It helps us keep uncovering the tales most people would rather leave buried. The Nebraska plains carried a silence so profound it could swallow a man whole. On that endless land stood Holbrook Farm, an isolated place where one man lived alone, wrapped in rumor and suspicion. Gerald Holbrook had inherited the farm from his father after his brothers moved away. Alone by temperament and by fate, he became the last of his bloodline to endure the heavy legacy of the land. By the late 70s, men in town whispered about Gerald. They said he barely spoke, his frame thin as fence posts, his eyes pale blue and empty. He seemed like a shadow among farmers. His visits to Millfield grew rarer. Twice a year he appeared to buy salt, flour, and barbed wire. He paid in cash, said little, and vanished again. Each return trip made him look older than his years. Neighbors, though in truth the nearest lived 8 miles away, noticed odd habits. Gerald stood in his fields for hours, watching his herd. He spoke to them in low tones, and the cows seemed to answer. Holbrook Farm itself looked abandoned from the road. Paint peeled from the farmhouse until it resembled bone. Fences sagged, the barn roof leaked. Yet the herd of 36 cows thrived with strange precision. They were too still. Men driving past late at night swore the cows lined up like soldiers, heads turned toward the house, their eyes glowing with green reflections as if something inside them was awake. The sheriff once drove out, claiming it was a routine check. Gerald met him at the gate and spoke quietly. The lawman returned pale and refused to share what was said that day. Tragedy deepened the mystery when Gerald's companion disappeared. Some said the man had walked away. Others whispered he had been consumed by the farm itself. Gerald never explained, and no grave marker appeared on the land. Afterward, Gerald withdrew further. His rare town visits showed him ragged, clothes stained with hay and soil, smelling of something foul beneath the scent of cows. Men stepped back when he passed in silence. By 1987, the farm had become legend. Fathers warned sons not to trespass. Boys dared each other to touch the gate after dark. Truckers swore their radios crackled with static near the property line. And always, there were the cows, perfectly ordered, perfectly obedient. They did not wander. They did not graze freely. They waited, still as stone, as if following some signal only Gerald understood. Rumors thickened. Some said Gerald had gone mad after his companion vanished, pouring his grief into animals. But madness could not explain cows that mirrored his every move, nor eyes glowing like lanterns at dusk. The land itself seemed wrong. Crops failed near his fences, grass grew in twisted patterns, and crows avoided the fields altogether. Hunters claimed no deer crossed the property anymore, as though the ground rejected them. Still, Gerald survived. He milked the herd, mended fences just enough, and kept outsiders away. His life became a boundary in the county. Holbrook Farm marked the place where sense ended and strangeness began. Then, one autumn evening, whispers became alarm. A man's truck broke down near the farm. He walked up the drive seeking a phone. Gerald refused him entry, but the man saw through the window. Inside, 3 children sat on the floor. Not calves, but not fully boys either. Their limbs bent strangely, their eyes too wide. They clung together and called Gerald father in voices that chilled the air. The witness stumbled back, heart pounding, and later told his brother. Word spread by dawn. Gerald, the recluse, the loner with 36 cows, now had sons no one had seen before, boys who seemed unnatural. The sheriff returned, this time with a deputy. They found Gerald calm, standing by the barn with his pale eyes focused beyond them. He insisted the boys were his and no law could interfere. Yet questions multiplied. Where had they come from? No one remembered a pregnant partner. No adoptions were filed. And the boys, thin, strange, with movements more animal than human, were unlike any children the county had known. The local doctor, a man hardened by years of farm injuries and harsh births, was summoned. He prepared for something beyond medicine, his instincts warning that what he might see could not be explained. Gerald resisted, but eventually allowed them inside. The boys huddled together, whispering in voices too fluid, their eyes glimmering like polished glass. Their skin showed odd patterns, almost like hide beneath a thin surface. The doctor knelt, searching for pulses. Each boy had more than one heartbeat, a syncopated rhythm unlike any living thing he knew. His hands trembled as he realized nature had no blueprint for them. When asked where the boys came from, Gerald answered in riddles. He spoke of bargains made by ancestors, of nights when the moon was dark, of old knowledge written in journals buried in his attic. The sheriff pressed harder, asking if Gerald had stolen them, if they belonged to another family. Gerald only smiled with cracked lips and said, "They're mine, born of this farm, born of what was promised." That night the farm revealed its weight. The house seemed alive with drafts that whispered through rotten boards. The barn loomed behind, its doors sealed, a faint creaking echoing as though something massive shifted inside. The cows stood in their endless formation, eyes reflecting lantern light. They did not blink. They did not move. Their stillness pressed against the men's nerves like an unseen hand gripping their throats. Inside, the boys rocked gently, murmuring low sounds that resembled moos stretched into words. They clung together, their faces calm, their bodies shifting with eerie flexibility, as though joints bent in ways humans should not. The doctor felt torn. Were they victims, needing rescue? Or were they creations, belonging to something beyond understanding? The sheriff's hand hovered near his weapon, sweat running cold despite the October chill. Gerald spoke softly, almost tenderly. He said the farm had given him what he wanted most: sons. Sons born of love, patience, and a covenant older than his bloodline. Sons who were not bound by human limits. The doctor tried to argue. These were children. They required care, study, protection. Gerald disagreed. He claimed they were perfect, that their existence proved the old way still worked when a man believed strongly enough. The sheriff knew the law demanded he act. Yet something in Gerald's words, something in the boy's unblinking eyes, made the room feel less like a farmhouse and more like a threshold into another world. The night air grew heavy with the smell of milk and decay. The cows outside shifted at last, their bodies turning in unison toward the house, as if awaiting a command from the man inside. The doctor closed his bag, shaken, muttering that no science could explain what he had seen. The sheriff stared at Gerald and whispered that something on this farm was spreading, and it could not be contained. Gerald only smiled faintly, his cracked teeth catching the light. "Everything wants to be more than it is," he said. "The grass longs to be a tree. The cow longs to be a man." When the lawmen left, the boys watched them with luminous eyes, their heads tilting in unnatural angles, their voices humming together in a low harmony that followed the men into the dark. By the time the sheriff reached town, He looked a decade older. He admitted to his deputy that Holbrook Farm was no longer a place of rumors. It was a place where boundaries had already broken. And so the legend of the isolated farm deepened. Gerald Holbrook, alone with his herd and his strange sons, stood at the center of something too vast for law, too unnatural for medicine, and too real to ignore. The county slept uneasily that night, knowing a man out there had bent the rules of life itself. Whether by madness, by bargain, or by something older, Holbrook Farm was no longer just land. It was a wound. The sheriff returned to Holbrook Farm with deputies, lanterns casting pale light against the farmhouse walls. They entered not as curious men, but as witnesses to something that defied explanation, something neither law nor scripture had prepared them for. The three boys sat together on sacks of feed and old blankets. Their movements were jerky, flexible in ways no child should manage. Their eyes followed the deputies with unblinking focus, horizontal pupils dilating and contracting unnaturally. The eldest introduced himself as Thomas. His voice carried a watery resonance, as though speaking through liquid. The others clung to him, William and Samuel. They nodded in unison, repeating his words in eerie harmony. Each boy seemed both fragile and resilient. Their limbs were thin, elongated, their joints bending at angles beyond human range. Yet their skin showed mottled patterns like hide, with fine hair swirling in circular ridges. The deputies exchanged glances, their jaws tight. The boys smiled as though aware of the men's fear. They did not fidget or look away. Their calmness unnerved more than tantrums ever could. Gerald stood behind them, tall and thin, hair wild like dry straw. His pale eyes gleamed with conviction. "These are my sons," he said, "born from patience, faith, and the bargain of old." The sheriff asked how they came to be. Gerald answered without shame. He spoke of nights when the moon was gone, of thin places where boundaries weakened, where a man could ask and be answered. His words carried madness and belief intertwined. He claimed the cows were part of it, that they carried seeds of change within them. Through them, new children could be born, neither calf nor boy, but something more. The deputies shifted uneasily. One muttered that the man belonged in an asylum. Yet the boys sat before them, flesh and bone, undeniable. Madness might explain Gerald, but it could not explain living children. The doctor stepped closer, kneeling before Thomas. He reached for the boy's wrist, feeling for a pulse. His hand trembled when he felt 3 heartbeats overlapping, each rhythm out of sync yet perfectly alive. The boy tilted his head 90 degrees, impossible for a human neck, and smiled. "Papa says we're strong," Thomas whispered. His brothers echoed softly, "Strong." Their voices overlapped like cords strung across water. The doctor withdrew, pale and sweating. He had delivered hundreds of children, treated countless farm injuries, but never had he felt such dread. He muttered that these boys were not possible. Yet here they were. The sheriff demanded again where they came from. Gerald repeated, "From me? From the herd? From the land itself?" His cracked smile revealed teeth filed flat, as if shaped to mirror the chewing surfaces of cattle. One deputy nearly gagged, his hand over his mouth. Another stepped back toward the door, muttering about devils. Gerald only chuckled low, his voice like wind through broken wood. "You fear what you cannot name." The boys began to hum, a low sound vibrating the floorboards. The harmony hurt the deputies' ears, made their teeth ache. It was not music, but something older, a tone that called to unseen things. The sheriff shouted at Gerald to stop them. Gerald merely whispered, and the boys fell silent instantly. Their obedience was absolute, not like children to a father, but like creatures bound by tether. The doctor's instincts screamed to remove them from the farm, to bring them under study, perhaps treatment. But a terrible question lingered. Were they children needing saving, or new beings that should never leave this place. Gerald warned that taking them would doom the county. "They need their milk," he insisted, gesturing toward the barn. "Without it, they'll wither. With it, they thrive. Break the cycle, and you unleash disaster." The sheriff bristled, his hand brushing his revolver. "Milk or not, they can't stay here like this. They need proper care." Gerald's eyes glimmered strangely. "Care? They have me. I am their shepherd." The doctor whispered that the boy's biology was unstable. Their eyes, their pulses, their proportions, all suggested something incomplete, something balanced precariously between species. If removed, perhaps they would collapse, or perhaps they would spread. One boy licked his brother's hair with a long, rough tongue, grooming him like livestock. The deputies recoiled. Gerald only nodded proudly. "See, instincts of kinship, stronger than any bond of man or beast." The sheriff demanded to see the barn. Gerald's expression shifted to warning. "Not yet," he said. "Not until you understand what has been built here." His words hinted at secrets larger than 3 impossible children. The deputies grew restless. Their lanterns flickered against peeling wallpaper, against the hollow eyes of the boys. Fear made their breaths ragged. They were men used to storms and wild animals, yet these children unraveled them. The doctor studied their skin again, noticing faint patterns, spirals and ridges impossible in natural development. They were symmetrical, as though grown by design rather than chance. The thought chilled him more than any accident could. The sheriff considered his options. Arrest Gerald? Remove the boys? Call federal authorities? Each choice risked catastrophe. Gerald's calm confidence suggested he knew something worse than arrest might unfold if the wrong decision was made. The boys reached out in unison, their hands small but strange, fingers jointed oddly. They touched the doctor's sleeve, leaving faint moisture that smelled faintly of milk and copper. He pulled back quickly, shaken. One whispered, "Hungry." Another echoed, "Thirsty." Gerald rose, moving toward the barn door. "They need their portion," he explained. "You'll see. You'll all see. Tonight they drink, and tomorrow they grow stronger than before." The deputies argued in low voices. None wished to follow Gerald into the barn. None wanted to see what supplied that milk. But duty forced them, and fear of the unknown tightened every step. The boys watched them with strange patience, as though aware of what came next. Their eyes glowed faintly in lantern light, reflecting something beyond human understanding. Their silence felt heavier than any cry could. Gerald opened the door slowly. The night outside was still, no wind, no crickets, only the distant sound of cows shifting as though aware their secret was about to be revealed. The sheriff stepped forward, revolver ready. The deputies followed reluctantly. The doctor trailed behind, clutching his bag though it contained no instrument suited for what lay beyond. Gerald led them, his gait uneven and animal-like. The boys did not move. They remained behind, humming softly once more, their low harmonies vibrating the thin walls. The sound chased the men out into the yard like an echo of doom. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of milk soured and blood dried. Lantern light revealed the barn's looming doors. Gerald touched the rusted latch with reverence, as if greeting a sanctuary. The sheriff demanded answers. Gerald only whispered, "The herd waits." He pushed the doors open, hinges screaming like dying animals. The deputies raised their lanterns, light spilling across a darkness that seemed to swallow it whole. Inside, the herd stood in a circle, 36 cows facing inward. Their bodies were tense, eyes gleaming with unnatural light. In the center, hay was arranged in spirals, symbols impossible to mistake for chance. The doctor froze at the sight. Something was wrong with the animals, their hides patterned unnaturally, their breathing synchronized, their heads turning in unison. They were more than cows, and less than anything natural. Gerald stepped into the circle as though into a church. He spread his arms wide and smiled. "This," he said softly, "is where my sons were born. This is where man and herd become one." The deputies staggered back, clutching their lanterns. The sheriff's revolver trembled in his hand. The doctor whispered a prayer, and Gerald's words hung heavy in the still air. "These boys are the beginning, not the end." Behind them, from the farmhouse, the strange children began to sing. Their voices carried across the fields, lowing and human syllables intertwined. The cows shifted, as though answering. The night itself seemed to bend closer. The men realized then that the children who shouldn't exist were not accidents. They were signs of something larger, something old, and whatever had begun on Hullbrook Farm was no longer just Gerald's secret. The barn loomed ahead like a cathedral built to something ancient. Its wood groaned in the night air, and lantern light flickered against symbols carved into beams, marks no farmer would ever admit making. Gerald moved with reverence, his hand brushing the weathered doors as if greeting a living thing. "This place holds truth," he whispered. The deputies shifted nervously, lanterns trembling, unwilling to step closer without command. The sheriff urged them forward, his revolver drawn, his voice gruff but shaking. "Open it, Gerald. Whatever's inside, we're seeing it tonight." Gerald's cracked smile returned. "Then brace yourselves, for you'll never forget." The latch shrieked, and the doors groaned wide. The stench poured out first. Milk turned sour, iron tang of blood, and something earthy, like soil freshly disturbed. The deputies gagged, covering their mouths with trembling hands. Inside, 36 cows stood in a perfect circle, heads bowed inward toward a raised platform of hay and bone. Their bodies heaved in unison, their eyes glowing faintly like coals hidden beneath flesh. The sheriff muttered a curse under his breath. The doctor's lantern illuminated spirals and circles in the hay, shapes too deliberate to dismiss as livestock disorder. They seemed alive, writhing patterns designed to communicate. Gerald stepped into the circle, his thin figure cutting across the lantern glow. The cows shifted slightly, but not one moved from formation. They breathed together, a chorus of lungs echoing across wooden beams. On the platform lay remnants that looked disturbingly human, bones, some small, some large, etched with the same spirals. The doctor's eyes widened as he realized they weren't just bones. They'd been fused with animal remains. The deputies staggered back. "Sweet Lord," one muttered. Gerald only shook his head slowly. "Not Lord. Something older. Something that listens when a man cries out and gives him what he thinks he deserves." The sheriff demanded answers. "What happened here? Who are those bones from?" Gerald's voice softened, almost fond. "Attempts. The herd teaches through failure. Too much man, they rot. Too much beast, they collapse. Balance is the key." The doctor whispered about abominations, but Gerald raised his hand. "No. Sons. Each one was a step, each one closer to perfection. Now Thomas, William, and Samuel live. They are proof the balance can hold." A deputy's lantern caught a movement in the shadows. Figures shifted among the stalls, half hidden, limbs twisted wrong, faces half human and half bovine. They watched silently, suffering etched into their contorted frames, their breathing ragged and pained. The doctor gasped. "These are alive!" Gerald nodded. "Helpers. They tend the herd. They milk, they clean, they obey. They are family of another kind. Not failures, bridges that never reach the far side." The sheriff leveled his revolver. "These aren't family. They're victims." Gerald's pale eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Victims? No. They were drifters, wanderers, men forgotten by the world. I gave them purpose, better than dying nameless." One creature stepped forward, half his face still human, the other stretched into a snout. He whispered, "Help," with one mouth, while the other mouth lowed mournfully. The deputies recoiled, nearly dropping their lanterns. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You've damned these men." Gerald's tone sharpened, low and rumbling. "I've elevated them. They are more than man, more than beast. They exist beyond pity. They've been touched by what lies beneath." The doctor demanded to know what beneath meant. Gerald's cracked smile returned. He gestured to the ground. "The barn rests on a cave. My ancestors found it during the drought of 1842. They listened. They learned." He continued, voice distant, almost sermon-like. "It is no god, no devil. Older than both. It lives in the soil, in the grass, in the milk. It offers bargains, and it never lies." The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. Gerald's words carried madness, yet the evidence stood around them. The warped creatures, the circle of cows, the spirals carved into bone. Madness alone couldn't explain what their eyes confirmed. The sheriff asked about Gerald's companion who had disappeared years earlier. Gerald's voice dropped to a reverent hush. "He became the first bridge. He chose to join the herd. He gave himself willingly. He's still here." The men looked among the cows, unease deepening. Their eyes darted over hides and horns, searching for some fragment of humanity. The herd shifted, tails swishing, bodies breathing as though one colossal organism bound together. Gerald spread his arms, face lit by lantern flame. "This is the future. The children prove it. Sons who can carry both man's will and the herd's strength. Sons who will lead when I am gone." The doctor shouted, "They're unstable! You're endangering the county!" Gerald only shook his head. "You're blind. They're perfection. With them, the herd becomes more. With them, the boundaries between species collapse, and everything grows into what it was meant to be." The sheriff raised his revolver toward Gerald. The deputies mirrored him, lanterns shaking. The creatures in the stalls stirred uneasily, their low groans filling the air. The cows turned, 36 pairs of glowing eyes locking on the intruders. Gerald's voice thundered suddenly, deeper than before, resonant like the ground itself speaking. "You can't take them. You can't stop this. The milk has already gone beyond this farm. You've already drunk it, eaten it, dreamed it." The sheriff faltered. "What are you saying?" Gerald stepped closer, his eyes sharp, unblinking. "The milk leaves this farm, sold to the co-op. Diluted, yes, but still carrying the seed. For 3 years you've been feeding the change." The doctor's stomach dropped. He remembered patients with sudden strange symptoms. Skin rashes, odd cravings, unexplained visions. He realized with horror that it hadn't been isolated. Whatever started here had already seeped into every table in the county. The deputies cursed, one clutching his stomach as if suddenly sick. Gerald's smile spread wider. "It's too late to resist. The children are the sign, the herd is ready, and the land itself calls for transformation." From the platform came a sound, a wet, shifting creak. Bones rattled, hay rustled, something massive moving just out of lantern light. The sheriff aimed his revolver, finger trembling. Gerald whispered, "Behold, the true mother of the herd." A shape emerged, twisted and immense, part cow, part man, yet not entirely either. Its body pulsed with iridescent veins, its eyes wide and unblinking. It regarded them with a terrible calm, intelligence glinting behind its animal features. The doctor staggered backward, clutching his bag like a talisman. The deputies froze, fear locking their limbs. Gerald fell to his knees, arms spread in worship. "See? This is no horror. This is fulfillment." The sheriff shouted for the deputies to fall back, but the circle of cows shifted inward, closing ranks. 36 bodies moved as one, cutting off the exit, their glowing eyes fixed unblinking on the intruders. The barn pulsed with noise, lowing harmonies whispered human words, the wet creak of flesh transforming. The doctor realized they were surrounded not by animals and men, but by something new, something forming itself from both. Gerald rose again, face wild with conviction. "This is the bargain. Sons born stronger, herds risen higher, men freed from limits. Tonight you've seen the truth, and tomorrow all men will drink it willingly. The sheriff fired a warning shot into the rafters. The sound cracked the barn's stillness, but the creatures didn't scatter. They only stared, united, patient, as if certain time was on their side. The deputies shouted in panic, their lanterns shaking wildly. Shadows warped across the barn walls, monstrous silhouettes bending unnaturally. The sheriff's grip on his revolver tightened as he realized the fight wasn't against Gerald. It was against the land itself. The doctor whispered, "This will spread." His words felt more like prophecy than warning. Gerald's smile confirmed it. It already has. Every household that drinks milk, every child who eats butter, they carry the seed of change. The creatures in the stalls stepped forward, their broken bodies twitching. Some crawled, others staggered upright. Their eyes shone with suffering yet devotion. They joined the herd's circle, swelling the living wall that trapped the intruders inside. The sheriff's voice broke with desperation. "You've damned us all!" Gerald's laugh rumbled, resonant, unnatural. "No, I've blessed you. I've given you a future. The children are proof. They'll inherit the earth, and you'll watch them lead the way." Lantern flames wavered, casting the barn in flickering chaos. The sheriff's men faced the impossible. 3 children who shouldn't exist, a herd that seemed one mind, and a man who claimed the land itself demanded their transformation. The night closed around Holbrook Farm like a secret too heavy to contain. Within those barn walls, law, medicine, and reason broke down. The only certainty was this: the bargain had been struck, and the world was already changing. The county believed the horror was contained at Holbrook Farm. Yet milk flowed outward, quiet and unnoticed, carried in trucks to co-ops and markets. What began as whispers in barns soon became symptoms across towns. Men began waking with strange cravings. Farmers chewed grass absent-mindedly while leaning on fence posts. Boys in school gnawed pencils until their gums bled. Workers drank gallons of milk without quenching a thirst that grew daily. The doctor noticed first. His patients spoke of nightmares filled with lowing herds, of voices calling from pastures at midnight. Their eyes appeared glassy, and their pulses beat with unsettling irregularities, rhythms like cloven steps. In the diner, truckers spoke of hallucinations on night routes. They swore they saw herds standing in perfect lines, blocking highways, then vanishing when headlights approached. One man crashed his rig, insisting he swerved from a bull. The sheriff tried to dismiss the stories. Yet deputies admitted to dreams of cows speaking in human voices, promising strength and freedom. One deputy awoke covered in milk, though none was in his house. Milk jugs vanished from stores faster than they could be stocked. Fathers carried cartons home by the armful, claiming their sons drank endlessly. Some boys developed unsettling musculature, their eyes reflecting strange gleams at dusk. The doctor visited schools. He found several boys sitting in silence, chewing cud-like wads of grass taken from pockets. Their teachers whispered that discipline failed. They obeyed only the unseen rhythm of something larger. Reports spread of men growing restless in church pews, twitching at sermons, staring at stained glass cows in painted nativity scenes. When questioned, they answered with vacant stares, voices repeating phrases no preacher recognized. The sheriff returned to Holbrook Farm, demanding Gerald stop the milk shipments. Gerald stood by his barn, arms crossed, face cracked with a smile. "Stop? You can't stop what's already inside them," he said. The sheriff threatened to burn the barn. Gerald laughed, his voice echoing against the fields. "Burning won't matter. The milk is in their bones now. You'll see soon enough. Every man will answer the call." Meanwhile, in town, boys began showing physical changes. Knees bent unnaturally, spines arched subtly, and their gait resembled the awkward shuffle of calves. Their fathers defended them fiercely, insisting the boys were only growing faster. The doctor examined one boy who had grown patches of hair along his arms. Beneath the skin, he felt something hard, like forming horn. The boy smiled eerily and whispered, "The herd waits for me." Milk itself seemed altered. Poured into glasses, it left thick films clinging stubbornly. Butter spread unevenly, streaked with faint green hues. Men who consumed it reported energy beyond measure, yet also suffered restless nights filled with voices. Farmers beyond Holbrook began reporting oddities. Cows in other herds refused to milk unless Gerald's herd was near. Calves born on distant farms carried strange markings, spirals on their hides, glowing eyes in moonlight. One farmer slaughtered a calf, horrified at its deformed legs. Yet the meat pulsed faintly even after death. He buried it in panic, refusing to sell beef, fearing the infection of his neighbors. The sheriff convened a town meeting. Men argued furiously, some demanding Holbrook Farm be destroyed, others defending Gerald as a visionary. Fists flew, benches overturned. The community fractured, torn between fear and loyalty to milk. The doctor begged them to act rationally, warning the changes were spreading faster than any disease he'd seen. His words were drowned out by chants. "The herd provides. The herd protects." Their voices sounded almost rehearsed. In the co-op's records, milk shipments from Holbrook were larger than any farm could produce. The numbers proved impossible, yet no one questioned it. The milk flowed, endless, as though the herd produced without limit. Boys from Gerald's herd began appearing in neighboring towns. No one knew how they traveled. They knocked on doors at night, calling men brother. Their eyes glowed faintly. Their voices promised strength if welcomed. Fathers let them inside, fed them, listened. By morning, the boys were gone, but the households were changed. Men spoke softly afterward, swearing allegiance to the herd. Their sons began humming in strange harmonies. The doctor inspected another patient, a man who drank 2 gallons daily. His teeth had flattened, molars ridged like grinders. He spoke of chewing endlessly, of longing for hay and straw more than meat. The sheriff grew desperate. He ordered fences built around Holbrook Farm, yet every morning they were broken. The wood splintered outward. No tracks appeared, only faint hoof marks circling like ritual around the posts. In the barn, Gerald gathered his sons. They drank heavily from buckets of milk, their bodies twitching in growth spurts, bones lengthening unnaturally. Gerald stroked their hair, whispering, "Soon you'll lead. Soon all men will follow." The sheriff confronted Gerald again. "You've poisoned this county." Gerald corrected him gently. "I've awakened it. You call it poison, but it's progress. Do you fear being more than a man? Do you fear being what the earth intends?" The doctor refused to believe progress could look like this. He showed Gerald his patient's deformities. Gerald only smiled. "Change always frightens those who cling to the old ways, but look closer. They're stronger. They're enduring." Meanwhile, local dairymen noticed something terrifying. Their own cows began producing tainted milk. Even without contact with Gerald's herd, the contamination spread. Milk smelled faintly metallic, carried strange warmth, and when consumed, induced visions of fields filled with chanting. Men stopped resisting. They welcomed the changes, craving more milk, demanding it. They spoke in unison at times, voices merging into harmonies unnatural to human throats. The town became a choir singing to invisible listeners. The sheriff tried to evacuate boys from schools. Fathers blocked him, standing shoulder to shoulder. Their eyes glowed faintly, their strength unnatural. "You'll not take them," one growled. The sheriff realized resistance was crumbling. The doctor wrote frantic notes documenting each case. Yet as he wrote, his own hands trembled. His fingernails thickened, ridged like horn. He wore gloves, ashamed, but knew the infection touched him as well. At night, Gerald's barn became a beacon. Men from towns walked miles silently, gathering outside. They stood in lines, staring at the farmhouse windows. The sheriff watched from a ridge, horrified at the growing congregation. The boys sang inside, their voices carrying far across fields. The herd answered, lowing in rhythm. The men outside swayed, repeating the words though they didn't understand them, their faces blank with devotion. The sheriff confided in the doctor, whispering that the county was lost. "This will spread beyond here," he said. The doctor, pale and trembling, admitted it already had. Reports from neighboring counties mirrored their symptoms. The milk had crossed state lines. Truckers carried it farther each week. Gerald's influence stretched silently into kitchens hundreds of miles away. The infection was no longer local. It was national. The sheriff stared at his badge, feeling its weight hollow. Law had no reach here. The herd had claimed the county, and soon the nation. The sheriff whispered, "What's left for men like us?" The doctor answered grimly, "Survival, or transformation." His words hung like a noose between them. In the distance, the barn glowed faintly, lanterns inside flickering as though a heartbeat within the walls themselves. Gerald stood in the doorway, his silhouette tall and gaunt, sons gathered beside him. They looked out over the silent congregation of men, their voices rising together. The herd grows. The herd claims. The herd endures. And in that moment, the sheriff understood. Resistance was no longer about law or order. It was about whether humanity itself could survive the milk's call, or whether all men would one day join the herd. Hospitals filled with men suffering symptoms no textbook described. Fathers arrived complaining of endless hunger, aching joints, and dreams of fields filled with chanting. Boys came with bones bending wrong, yet walking sturdier than ever. The doctor paced between rooms, his notes chaotic. He recorded pulses out of rhythm, pupils dilating like horizontal slits, molars grinding flat. These men weren't simply sick, they were changing into something else entirely. The sheriff demanded quarantines, but order collapsed quickly. Men refused confinement, insisting nothing was wrong. They returned to barns, drinking raw milk, chewing hay and singing together in low voices that resonated through hospital walls. One deputy reported men gathering in abandoned silos, chanting with boys at the center. The gatherings ended with strange feasts. Pails of warm milk passed hand to hand, shared like sacred communion among brothers. The sheriff stormed a gathering, revolver drawn. Dozens of men turned in unison, their eyes reflecting lantern light. They spoke together. "We are heard. We are strong." The sheriff retreated, shaken by their unity. The doctor's handwriting grew frantic as he tracked cases spreading outward. Neighboring towns called, describing identical symptoms. He realized it was unstoppable. Milk had entered bloodlines, reshaping men, creating generations destined for transformation. The sheriff still clung to duty. He rode across county lines, pleading with other lawmen. They listened politely, but many already showed signs themselves. Some chewed grass between sentences. Others hummed softly as he spoke. He returned home defeated. His badge meant nothing. Authority was dissolving beneath the weight of something older, something primal. He began to wonder if Gerald was right. Perhaps this wasn't sickness, but inevitability. Men in town split into factions. Some resisted, burning milk, blocking barns, trying to quarantine sons. Others embraced it, celebrating new strength, lifting hay bales alone, running barefoot for miles without tiring. The divide deepened. Brothers fought brothers in fields. One defended his son's glowing eyes, another demanded the boy be restrained. Fists turned to knives, blood-stained haystacks, yet both sides sang the same low hum afterward, unable to resist. The doctor saw his own reflection in a mirror, eyes shining faintly, teeth flattening. He broke the glass in fury. But when he spat blood, it smelled faintly of milk, sweet and metallic. He wept silently. The sheriff confronted Gerald once more, riding to the farm at dusk. Gerald greeted him calmly, 3 sons standing nearby, their eyes fixed unblinking. "You see it now," Gerald said. You know it's beyond you." The sheriff growled, "This isn't salvation. This is corruption." Gerald stepped closer, voice soft. "You call it corruption because you fear losing yourself. But isn't life always about change? Evolution wears many faces, Sheriff." The boys began humming. The sheriff felt his chest vibrate with their resonance, knees weak. He gripped his revolver but couldn't aim. Gerald touched his shoulder, whispering, "You're tired. Let go. Join what's already yours." The sheriff shoved him back, spitting curses. He fled the farm, shaken, revolver still trembling. Yet the echo of that hum followed him into dreams, voices calling his name, promising relief if he surrendered. In town, resistance collapsed further. Stores closed, streets emptied. Men gathered in barns, in fields, in churches stripped of sermons. They sang in unison, heads bowed toward unseen shepherds, waiting for commands from Gerald's herd. The doctor tried writing letters to universities, to state boards. But every reply came from men already infected, words softened, lines repeating Gerald's phrases. The herd's language was spreading into written word itself. He realized knowledge couldn't save them. Science bent under the weight of the unnatural. His choice was personal now. Resist until death, or surrender and gain the strength he saw in his patients. The sheriff called a final meeting in town square. Only a handful arrived. Gaunt men, hollow-eyed but still themselves. He spoke of burning Holbrook Farm, ending Gerald, saving what remained. Their faces showed doubt. One man asked, "Save what?" The sheriff faltered. What was left to save? Families dissolved, schools silenced, farms abandoned. The only constant was milk, flowing endlessly, uniting men in something larger than themselves. Still, a plan formed. The sheriff, the doctor, and a few loyal deputies gathered rifles, kerosene, dynamite. They prepared to storm the barn, to burn it all, to kill Gerald and his sons. The doctor hesitated. His hands trembled, fingers thickening subtly. He whispered that maybe Gerald was right. Maybe fighting was futile. The sheriff snarled, "We're still men. If we don't fight, we're nothing but cattle." They rode at midnight, lanterns hidden, hearts pounding. The farm glowed faintly in distance, voices of boys rising, answered by the herd's low rumble. The land itself seemed alive, trembling with anticipation. At the gate, they paused. The sheriff ordered silence, but already the herd knew. 36 pairs of glowing eyes turned toward them, unblinking, patient. The deputies loaded rifles, sweat dripping, fear choking their throats. They advanced, kerosene ready, but Gerald stood waiting at the barn door, tall and gaunt, his sons beside him. "You came late," he said calmly. "The choice is already made." The sheriff raised his rifle. Gerald spread his arms. "Shoot then. Kill me. But the milk is in you, in your sons, in your neighbors. Fire can't burn what's already in their blood." The deputies faltered. Their rifles lowered slightly, doubt breaking courage. The doctor's hands shook violently. His nails cracked, shedding flakes like horn. He whispered, "He's right. Even if we kill him, it continues." The sheriff shouted at them to hold steady. He lit a match, flame flickering. But the boys sang then, their voices weaving through the herd's low chorus, and the deputies dropped to their knees in tears. The doctor followed, muttering, "I can't resist any more." He crawled forward toward Gerald. The sheriff cursed, torn between killing them or saving them. His hand trembled, match nearly burning his fingers. Gerald whispered, "Lay it down, Sheriff. You can't win. Choose to survive, choose to lead, or burn alone while the world becomes herd." His sons smiled, their eyes reflecting unnatural green light. The sheriff screamed and hurled the match onto the hay. Flames burst upward. The barn glowed instantly, smoke choking the air. Cows bellowed, the herd thrashing. Gerald only stood smiling, arms wide in worship. The deputies wailed, torn between fleeing and kneeling. The doctor staggered backward, face lit by flames. The sheriff forced them toward the gate, shouting over the roaring fire, his voice breaking, "We end it here!" But the herd did not scatter. They advanced through flames, hides igniting, eyes glowing brighter. They moved as one, encircling the men. The sheriff realized fire meant nothing against creatures already remade by something older. The doctor screamed as one burning cow lunged, horns striking him down. Deputies fled, only to be surrounded by the glowing-eyed congregation of townsmen arriving, humming in harmony. They weren't there to save. They were joining. The sheriff fired wildly, shots cracking through smoke. Gerald's laugh carried above the chaos, deep and resonant. "You can't stop it. You can't stop what's already begun in every glass, in every body." Men poured into the yard, dozens, maybe hundreds. Their eyes glowed faintly, their voices hummed. They pressed closer, hands reaching not to kill, but to embrace, to welcome. The sheriff felt their heat closing in. He fought until his rifle clicked empty. Flames consumed the barn, but the herd kept advancing. Gerald's silhouette remained tall in firelight, suns beside him. His voice rose. "The choice is no longer yours." The sheriff dropped his rifle, chest heaving. Around him, men knelt in reverence, flames painting their faces golden. He stood alone, trembling, torn between resistance and surrender, between man and herd. The night demanded his answer, and so the spread reached its climax, not by force, but by choice. Each man decided, fight and perish, or surrender and transform. The sheriff's decision would echo across the land, shaping what mankind would become. The flames devoured Holbrook Barn, but fire could not consume the secret it guarded. Even as timbers cracked and cattle bellowed, Gerald and his sons stood calm, their silhouettes framed against the inferno like prophets. The sheriff staggered back, revolver empty, lungs scorched with smoke. Around him, men knelt in worship, voices humming in unison. He realized the battle was no longer against fire or herd, but against belief. The doctor, bloodied and broken, whispered through cracked lips, "It spreads because they want it, because men crave purpose. Gerald gives them what they long for, strength, belonging, unity." His voice trembled with bitter resignation. Gerald raised his hands skyward, laughing as sparks showered. "The herd endures. Fire is only a trial. Look." And indeed, through smoke, figures emerged, half man, half beast, walking unharmed through flames, their eyes glowing emerald. The sheriff fired again, though his revolver held no bullets. His hand shook, rage and despair boiling together. He screamed, "You're making monsters!" Gerald replied calmly, "No, Sheriff, I'm making guardians, protectors for a broken world." The boys, Thomas, William, Samuel, stepped forward, their forms taller than before, skins stretched, bones elongated, voices resonant like horns. They spoke together. "We are sons of the herd. We will lead where men have failed." The sheriff dropped to his knees, overwhelmed. Around him, deputies surrendered, their rifles cast aside. Townsmen pressed closer, chanting Gerald's name, humming with his sons. The sheriff stood alone, the last voice resisting transformation. The doctor gasped, "Sheriff, it's too late. Even if Gerald dies, the milk has already reshaped us. The herd is inside us now. Fighting only delays the inevitable tide." His words shattered the sheriff's resolve. But something burned within him still. Duty, pride, the last thread of manhood untaken. He shouted over the chanting, "If you surrender, you're no longer men. You're beasts. You trade freedom for chains of milk." Gerald's smile widened, pale eyes gleaming. "Chains? Sheriff, freedom is the illusion. Alone, men die small, forgotten. Together, as herd, we are eternal. No hunger, no loneliness, no weakness. Only unity everlasting." The sheriff roared, charging at Gerald with fists. They clashed amid flames. Gerald did not fight back. He embraced the blows, laughing as blood ran from his mouth. "You hit me, but you strike yourself." The sons moved forward, but Gerald raised his hand. Let him. Let him choose." His voice echoed through smoke. The sheriff struck again and again until his fists split. Still, Gerald stood smiling, unbroken. Finally, the sheriff collapsed, exhausted. Gerald knelt, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You fought bravely, but the fight was never against me. It was against the herd, and the herd always wins." The men surrounding them hummed louder, harmony building until the air vibrated. The sheriff's vision blurred, his heartbeat sinking with their rhythm. He felt his teeth ache, his bones twitch, his body leaned toward surrender. The doctor wept, whispering, "We can't resist forever. The choice is not survival versus death. The choice is whether we join willingly or be dragged screaming. Either way, the herd claims us." The sheriff clenched his teeth, tears streaming. He screamed into the firelit sky, "I am still a man!" His voice cracked, drowned by the harmony. The words felt hollow even to himself, frail against the chorus. Gerald leaned close, whispering, "You'll see. Man and herd will walk side by side, not as monsters, but as guardians. The old world failed. My sons will shepherd the new." Thomas, William, Samuel raised their arms. Flames bent strangely around them, refusing to touch their skin. They spoke. "We are not beasts. We are future. We protect the land. We guard the blood. We endure." Around them, transformed men echoed, "We endure." Their glowing eyes fixed on the sheriff, waiting. Not to kill him, but to welcome him. Their patience was more terrifying than any violence could be. The sheriff's chest heaved. His badge hung heavy. He whispered to himself, "Guardians or monsters?" The words looped endlessly, echoing in his mind. Was this salvation for mankind, or the final erasure of man's spirit? Gerald answered softly, as if hearing his thoughts. "Both. Monsters to those who cling to weakness. Guardians to those who accept strength. It is all a matter of perspective, Sheriff. Perspective and surrender." The doctor crawled forward, coughing blood. His eyes glowed faintly. "Sheriff, we must choose." His voice cracked with despair. "If we resist, we die. If we join, we live, though no longer ourselves." The sheriff stood shakily. Around him, men's voices swelled, the barn collapsing behind in thunderous ruin. Fire consumed wood, but not the herd. Out of smoke, their glowing eyes multiplied, unstoppable, endless. The sheriff gripped his revolver one last time. He raised it to Gerald's head. Men gasped, humming, faltered. Gerald only smiled, whispering, "Shoot if it comforts you, but you can't kill what's already eternal." The sheriff pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. His knees buckled. Laughter erupted, not mocking, but joyous. Gerald embraced him like a brother. "See? Even your weapon yields. The herd always reclaims what's broken." The sheriff fell to the ground, sobbing. He felt hands lifting him, warm and strong. Deputies, townsmen, even the doctor, all helping, not restraining. Their voices wrapped around him, promising unity, no more loneliness, no more fear. The sheriff's last thought of resistance faded. His heart matched their rhythm. His teeth shifted, flattening. His eyes reflected green. He whispered, "Guardians," and the word slipped free, accepted into the chorus. The barn collapsed fully, flames rising high. But the herd walked from fire unscathed, Gerald and his sons leading them. Men followed behind, transformed, their voices one. Together they marched into the fields, singing. Neighbors miles away awoke to the sound of low harmonies. They stepped outside, eyes glowing faintly, joining without hesitation. The herd spread across fields like a tide, unstoppable, claiming every farm, every man. Gerald's voice carried across the night. "The age of isolation ends. The age of herd begins. Guardians of land, keepers of strength. Together, we endure forever." His sons echoed. their voices weaving like sacred bells. By dawn, the county was silent, not with death, but with transformation. Men knelt in fields, chewing grass, singing softly. The herd had expanded beyond Holbrook, its boundaries dissolved. The land itself belonged to them. Whispers spread outward in days. Truckers carried tales of glowing-eyed men marching along highways. Towns awoke to find barns filled with strangers humming in unison. And everywhere, milk flowed endlessly, untainted, unstoppable. The sheriff was remembered not as a fighter, but as the first lawman to surrender. Some called him traitor, others called him wise. But in the herd, such labels dissolved. He was simply brother. Gerald's sons grew quickly, towering, their voices deep as thunder. They led gatherings in fields, preaching unity, promising strength. Men followed without question, drawn to their presence. The old ways crumbled, the new order rose. Outsiders arrived eventually, federal agents, soldiers, scientists. They entered the county with guns and instruments. None returned. The herd absorbed them silently, their resistance melting into devotion, their names forgotten in the chorus. And so the question lingered, guardians or monsters? To the herd, they were saviors. To the scattered few who resisted, they were nightmares. But resistance dwindled, and the herd endured, its truth spreading like wildfire. Gerald watched from his farmhouse porch, his sons beside him. His pale eyes gleamed with triumph. "They called me mad," he whispered. "Yet here we stand. Not mad, not broken, eternal." His voice drifted across fields. In distant cities, milk shipments arrived. Men drank deeply, unaware of origins. Dreams came first, visions of herds, of brothers calling, then cravings, then the change. Cities trembled as the tide swept inward, unstoppable, inevitable. The herd became the future. Man as he once was faded into memory. Sons led, fathers followed, brothers united. No loneliness remained, no hunger lingered. Only unity, everlasting, patient as the land itself. Guardians or monsters, the world would debate for generations. Yet in fields under endless skies, men hummed together, glowing eyes fixed on horizons. To them, the answer no longer mattered. They had chosen. They had endured. And so the story of Holbrook Farm ended not in isolation, but in expansion. What began as whispers in a barn became the hymn of mankind, sung by voices no longer alone, no longer afraid. The sheriff, once a man of law, now sang with them. His voice merged with Gerald's, with the doctor's, with the countless others. And the herd, eternal, walked onward. Guardians to some, monsters to all.